Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. This is Success Sadhana. My name is JM, and I welcome you all to a program today where we continue our series of lessons from the Golden Monk. Today, we'll discuss topic number 4, the root cause of all suffering and how to stop it, with your speaker, Vaish, a Bhakti yogi, author, and former monk. We are close to 26 members on Zoom and 10 members on Facebook. I have Shweka helping me out in managing social media today. Good afternoon, Vaish. Welcome to another episode of Success Sadhana.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'm very happy to be here and great to see you all. A little respite during the day to examine our higher selves in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the main wisdom texts that we borrow from frequently. There's a description of the person who's fixed in consciousness, and the whole premise of that section is that we're okay, actually. We're better than okay. Sometimes people say, "Are you okay?" And I say, "I'm better than okay." But in the Gita, there's a conversation, and the student Arjuna asks his teacher, "What are the symptoms of somebody who's fixed in consciousness?" And consciousness itself is fascinating. Not only is it fascinating, it has the qualities that are described in the Bhagavad Gita as being full of happiness for no reason. It's not like you won something. It's just that you are something that is extraordinary, and it doesn't diminish. So he says, does Krishna, to his student, that the first symptom is somebody who can notice that. That is the first symptom of being fixed in consciousness. Someone is able to notice the difference between his or her own consciousness and the changing mind. The mind, do you know the term flotsam and jetsam? Anybody? Yeah, a few sailors out there. Flotsam and jetsam. I learned that when I was a kid. We used to sail boats with my father.
Right? Like
yes.
Debris.
What is it, Sudhi?
Is it debris?
Yeah.
From a ship or something?
Yeah, specifically on the ocean. There's all kinds of floating things. And there may be more technical to which is flotsam and which is jetsam. But yeah, I think debris is a good word for it. And a lot of natural debris that's floating there. Similarly, the mind, which is oceanic, has flotsam and jetsam. And so the teacher, Krishna, says one who's able to notice that the various thoughts that are coming by me are like that. They're passing, and I don't have to grab onto them. When I start feeling obligated to grab onto them, and I then judge my state of existence by the state of my thoughts, then I'm in for a wild, frothy ride. So he says, instead, Atmanyevatmana tushta, tushta means satisfaction. A person who's fixed in consciousness is one who's able to experience happiness from within. Now that's free, which is nice. And it's something that we can do at any time. And many of the teachings that we're going through now, we call this the teachings of the Golden Monk. They're quite extensive, actually. 500 plus years ago, there was a very consequential teacher who went all over, especially South India and Bengal, and taught the tenets of bhakti yoga in a way that everybody could take to it. Of course, he was a great scholar, was the Golden Monk. In his youth, he proved himself in debate, even when he was a teenager, against great scholars of India, and was easily able to defeat them. He had a photographic memory, in fact. And he also had a penchant for making the complex philosophical ideas of the ancient wisdom literature simple and accessible to everyone. In fact, he had this sense that everybody should have this. You know, in some societies, that there's an idea that this is reserved for just a few people. Only highly qualified people can have this, and then they make up their own idea of who's qualified and who's not, right? Chaitanya was against that. He thought this is universal, and actually the wisdom literatures themselves say that it's meant for everybody. It doesn't depend on what kind of body you have or where you come from. It's applicable to every single person. So he went out of his way to interact with people from all different cultures, different parts of society, and then to consolidate or essentialize the teachings that anyone could take with him or her in their pockets, and then be able to access it on a regular daily basis. That's why his teachings persist even today, because in our fast-paced world, where it seems that we're always on the run, we need a process through which we can find that satisfaction, that tushta, from the Atma. Atma means our own selves. Who would have guessed? It's right there all the time. So he gave these teachings, and today we're going to go into the fourth section of his teachings, but we'll have a review of the first three before we do that in just a moment, because they're fundamental. And when we review them while we're doing this series, then by the end of this series, everyone will know them flat out. And we'll have a special quiz at the end too, to make sure you know them. And then you can just read them back and say, like, these are the main points. And then you can present the same philosophy that the Golden Monk taught to everybody in your office, or, you know, wherever you go. You can teach them the simple techniques that he taught for meditation, and some philosophical points too that are solid. So today, let's start with a meditation. And that means you could sit up a little bit straighter than you were just a moment ago, and get comfortable so that you can be alert but relaxed. And then try closing your eyes, because that way you can start observing a little bit more of your inward world, your inner world, and bring your awareness to your breath. And I'm going to walk you through a little meditation today. And in a moment, there'll be some sound effects, so don't be alarmed. Inhale deeply and exhale deeply. Help yourself to concentrate on your breath by mentally saying in on the inhalations and out on the exhalations. If your mind wanders, bring it back to your breath. Now bring your attention to your heart space. And imagine as you inhale that you're breathing a golden light into your heart. As you breathe out, the golden light fills the room around you. Breathe in soft, golden energy. Your heart is warm and open. Breathe out and release all tensions. Relax. You are on a beach close to the ocean, but not touching it. It's a beautiful day. The air is fresh. The sand is a brilliant white and the sky clear blue. The sun warms your skin and you can hear the waves lapping. The water is now bathing your feet. As it returns to the ocean, your feet become transparent. The next wave bathes your legs, and as it returns to the ocean, your legs too become transparent. Now the water is flowing up over your hips to your navel. As the water returns to the ocean, your body is transparent from the navel down. The next wave bathes you up to your neck. The water is warm and soothing. You feel safe. As the wave pulls back, your whole body is transparent. The next wave flows over your head. You breathe freely and you're relaxed. As the water returns to the ocean, your whole body is transparent. You can no longer see it. There's only you, the real you, who is free from all coverings, who is separate from the body. You're the witnesses, the witness of your life situations that surround you. And please take a moment to notice that you exist. Be consciously aware of your consciousness. Notice that you're alive. And notice that your life is different from your life situation. Now listen to this verse from the Bhagavad Gita. As the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. Those who sees with eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body can attain true happiness. And bring your attention back to your breath. Be grateful that you have oxygen to breathe. You have a body in which to move about and in which you can make spiritual advancement. And you can rub your palms together to create some friction. Open your eyes and come back into the Zoom. Welcome back from the beach, everybody. Actually, every night whenever we go to sleep, there's a way in which we're traveling in our subtle, or what's called astral body. We have two bodies, the gross physical body and the subtle physical body. And we can notice that we're the ones that come back into the gross physical body after we've been moving about. And when we're in that dream state, for the most part, every once in a while we become aware, oh, I'm dreaming, but mostly we've bought into that idea that here I am, I just got to work, the door is locked, I forgot my lunch, or whatever it may be. And when I'm working on things that I'm behind on, I have a recurring dream that I'm at the airport, can't find my ticket, and the plane's about to leave. So you're at work. Did you get paid while you were there? Not really, but we still take it as reality. And then when we open our eyes again, we take that as a reality also. So one of the teachings of the Golden Monk was to be aware of your context. Where are we actually? And who are we? It's one of the first teachings he gave to his student Sanatan. Because Sanatan, although he was a great scholar and a prime minister, he came to learn from the Golden Monk, and first thing he said was, I'm a fool, I don't know anything. I'm starting over. And please tell me who I am. So that was one of the first places that the Golden Monk's teaching started. It was, oh, who are we? No one practically has time these days, or it's a hurried schedule. So taking time to understand from the teachings who we are, and also observing for ourselves, can give us this centeredness as we move through the rest of our lives. So I hope you like that journey to the ocean and the observation of yourself beyond your life situation. So now let's take a look at the first lesson the Golden Monk gave, and we'll go through a few of the teachings before we get to today's, just as a review. So his first teachings were to Rupa. So there were two brothers. They practically ran the government of Bengal, great scholars. One was the finance minister, the other was the prime minister, and they had heard of the Golden Monk, and he just happened to be passing by where they were stationed, and they had sent him a letter that went through by courier, but the Golden Monk hadn't replied, so they decided to go and meet him for themselves. So they went there and met him, and he treated them like an old friend. And even that was the first time they were meeting. And then after that, both of them, Rupa and Sanatan, made preparations to leave their government employ so that they could become full-time students. And that's what they did. So in the first segment, we're hearing the basic teachings that the Golden Monk gave to Rupa. So let's see. The first thing he told him, did the Golden Monk, was that we're wanderers. And in Bengali, is a Brahmanda Brahmate Kon Bhagyavanji Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. He described that we're wandering where? Through universes. And you consider that we've come into this life, and if you can remember that, you might think, who are these people waiting for me when I just came out into this particular new setting? Where did I come from? And we don't practically know where we're going either. So wandering means that we're slightly aimless. We're not sure exactly where we came from, where we're going. But the monk said that actually, that's how all of us are situated in the world. We're being moved from one body to the next, and it's because of the force of our consciousness. So he called that samsara. It's actually a Sanskrit term, which means that we're flowing from one situation to the next, and that it's by the force of our consciousness. So while we're in that flow of samsara, he described it to be like in an ocean, and practically like we can't get any air. Just as soon as one wave subsides, the next wave comes. If you've ever been in that situation, I was once in Hawaii in a place called Makapu, and everything was fun and games until a huge set of waves came in. And one after the other, it was really hard to get out. By the time I just survived one wave, another big wave would come, had to duck under that. And so this is how the Golden Monk described the way life is in the material world. We're practically drowning. And one of the teachers that's in the line of the Golden Monk many generations later wrote a song in which he described the life's experience. And in Bengali, it's a very poetical language. He used the onomatopoeic expression habu dubu. This in Bengali means that you're drowning, but it has the sound of bubbles coming up, habu dubu. So he said, habu dubu bye. Please take a look, sir. You're actually drowning in this world. It's hard to get to the shore. Then he talked about, in answering this question, who we are, he said, we are spiritual. So we're not our material bodies, but we're spiritual. But what is our spiritual position as individual living entities? He said, we're marginal. So what that means is that we can move between spirit and matter. In fact, we can move anywhere because we're indestructible. Consciousness is never crushed, dried, burned, never withers with the wind. It's constant. It's just we're changing environments. So we can be in a spiritual environment or in a material environment. And in the material world, we change from one body to the next. And he said, our source is like the sun. So he gave this analogy that there's the sun and it's one thing, but it has different parts. In fact, the light is comprised of trillions and trillions of particles of light. So they are the sun, but they're not the sun. They're parts of the sun. So he said, we're part of the whole, but we have our own individual consciousness, but we're part of the unlimited source of all consciousness. And then he described the two worlds, material and spiritual. And just as on a reflecting pool, you can see the perfect image of a tree if it's situated in the right place and it looks real. Of course, that one has a few ripples, but I've seen in a place I visited in North Carolina, there's a perfect reflecting pool and there's a willow tree by the side of the pond. And it looks exactly the same as the one on the shore. I could stand there and look at it. I couldn't tell the difference. So he described, the Golden Monk, that this world that we're in now that's constantly changing is a reflection of reality. Just as there's variety here, there's variety in reality, because this is the reflected image of that reality. But of course, the complications, as we'll see in the next slide, come by trying to interact with the reflection. There's frustration because matter and spirit are not compatible. It's a grosser energy. Then he described how the process of spiritual growth starts as a seed. Seed gets planted in the heart. I have no intention of I have no spiritual impulse whatsoever, but he said that seed of desire gets planted in the heart, that let me find out more. Let me go beyond just living in the reflection. And that seed gets planted in the heart of somebody who has a fertile heart and also comes across somebody who already has that kind of impetus. And then the seed gets planted in the heart and starts to grow as a creeper. So then he described the spiritual practices as jal or Shravanadi jal. It means using, jal means water in Bengali. So you water the seed through the practices. One of them is shravanam, hearing spiritual sound. Kirtana means speaking spiritual sound. And then shravanam, kirtanam, Vishnu smaranam means then when you, whatever you hear, whatever you speak, then you remember. So there are 9 processes altogether that he taught for what is called bhakti yoga, that begin with hearing, chanting, remembering. And this is Shravanadi Jal. So you are the gardener. And you have that seed. So then if you water it, then the seed will grow. Then, as we talked about, you have to defend the creeper. Because as it starts to grow, it's very tender. And there's ways that it can be disturbed or even smashed. And one's progress in spiritual life, he said, can be curtailed. So you have to make sure that there's protection for the creeper. Then he said, as gardeners, we have to take out the weeds, because as you pour water, there are other seeds of various kinds of desire that will also grow up. So you have to weed the garden and take out these errant plants, bad habits and tendencies to become attached to insignificant things. So you have to be careful. So those are the first lessons. And then as we went to the second, he said that this devotional service or the practice of bhakti yoga is like an ocean. You won't be disappointed. It's unlimited. And he said, you can't measure its length and breadth, but he said, I'll describe 1 drop of it in my teachings. And then he said, you can taste it. And if you can sample a little taste and see what it feels like or taste it, then you'll know what the whole ocean is like and be more enthusiastic about drinking the whole ocean. And then quoting from some of the ancient wisdom literatures, he said, there are various kinds of bodies that we can take on as spiritual entities, wanderers. There are 8,400,000 species, and all of them are wandering in the same situation. They just have different perspectives because they have different bodies. It's amazing how many species and varieties there are. Oceanographers from empiric studies say that they've only cataloged about 10% of the various species in the ocean. Wonder what's down there. So this is one of the main concepts. You see that the soul is not compostable. Everything else is. Whatever we have, whatever we're interacting with in the material world eventually will disintegrate, and conservation of energy will enter back into the reservoir of energy, but not the spiritual spark, the living entity, sometimes called the soul. That conscious entity is indestructible. You can put it in the compost bin, but it won't break down. But this body, highly compostable. In fact, it's composting even as we speak. As we're sitting here, the body's composting practically. And the moment that we, as the spiritual spark, exit this present body, it rapidly composts. It goes through a series of changes. Unless you preserve it really quickly, it immediately loses its altitude. So you're not your body. We're not our bodies. We're not compostable, but everything in this world is. So we're passing through these various forms, one after the other, by the force of our own consciousness, especially when we leave one present body, whatever we're most used to focusing on. This is accommodated by the powerful material nature, which awards us a new physical body. This is described by Patanjali Muni thousands of years ago in the Yoga Sutras, when he talks about how by the force of consciousness, you are accommodated with a new body, just like a plaster of Paris You leave an impression in the sand. If you fill it in with plaster Paris, and it will solidify and it'll have an exact replica of your footprint as an example. And he says, in the same way, our consciousness, when we leave the body, gets filled in by material nature, and we're given the next facility to try to travel through the material world in a material body. So then the Golden Monk talked about how each form that we take is a portal. And through each kind of body that we have, you'll see in the next slide, we experience the world in a certain way. For instance, a dog walks through New York City and sees a fire hydrant and doesn't think about the civil engineering project and the fire department and what it means to have a society. And he doesn't think of history and how Benjamin Franklin started the first volunteer fire department. Through a dog's vision, he may see the fire hydrant and think of it as a place to mark his territory. Similarly, even in this life, we have youthful bodies, we have mature bodies, old bodies, and through each body, we'll see the world in a slightly different way. There's psychology, the various kinds of perspectives that, for instance, children have at different ages of their development. They're seeing through the lens of a particular body and mind and how it's developed. So the body's like that. It's a portal for us. So then, as I mentioned earlier, that death is a transitional period, just as birth is. And, you get the same kind of feeling if you've ever attended a birth or a death, which I have both. Of course, mostly deaths, because I mostly attended my own birth. But my wife worked as a midwife for a long time and, had that experience of bringing a lot of new children in. And, we've sort of compared notes. I've spent a lot of time with people who are just on their way out. And it's a liminal space because the soul's either coming into a new body or going out of one that just wore out or isn't usable anymore, whose time is up. So is that the end? No, not at all. There is no end. Soul's not compostable. So you just gave up one form, and now, according to the force of consciousness, at that liminal, at that transitional, rather, time, you'll be accommodated with the next set of circumstances, including a body and certain type of senses. Okay, these are all teachings from the Golden Monk, by the way. I'm just passing on what he said. And so then he described how out of millions of humans, few are serious about spiritual advancement. There's so many other things to look at, play with, worry about. And you can really go through a whole day just distracted. What about a week? Yes. Month? Yes. Year? Yes. 10 years? Yes. How about 100 years and actually just not think about it for a whole lifetime? Yes. So just as Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So this is also the opinion of the Golden Monk, that we should examine, why are we here? What's going on? But he said very few people actually do that. Then he described who is peaceful, because this is one of the ways we might feel, why am I always being pushed by my senses? So he described, and I think it's in the next slide, that there are various levels of consciousness. No, it's not, but I'll describe it. He said, when we have any material desires, that is, we have selfish desires to satisfy our senses, doesn't mean that we become antisocial or we don't have the necessities that we need to be healthy. But if I'm focused on how I can make my body more comfortable and happy, that's my main idea, so then you won't be happy. And anything else you want on a selfish basis won't bring peace. But if you come to the awareness that you're part of the whole, and you enter into the mood of selfless service, he said, then you find peace. You're perfectly aligned at that point. And then number 3, the teachings of the Golden Monk. We were treated to this Bengali verse from one of the ancient wisdom literatures. It's phoneticized here. But these were the teachings of the Golden Monk, still to Rupa. He said, if we don't distinguish between the bhakti creeper, that means when we have that spiritual desire planted in our heart, it starts to grow, and other creepers, the sprinkling of water is misused because the other creepers are nourished while the bhakti creeper is curtailed. So we have to be weeders. We have to be careful to take out the things that we don't need. So know your weeds. One thing is weeds grow in bad soil. And that's a good case for keeping our fundamentals in place, having spiritual fitness, name of this show, spiritual fitness. For instance, we have the 21-day spiritual fitness challenge, body, mind, spirit, ways to keep yourself in good stead spiritually, physically, mentally. Because if you don't, then it's easy for the weeds to grow, and a lot harder if you're in shape. So you can sort of see by how many weeds, just as they said at Michigan State University, are growing, what's the state of the soil. And then, of course, we extend the metaphor that you have to amend the soil. And if we're not feeling satisfied at all, which is altogether possible, and not peaceful, we may be suffering from spiritual starvation. So we have to make sure that we're giving water to satisfy not just the body or the mind, but also the self. So there's a way to do that. That's the spiritual practice. And it's helpful, said the Golden Monk, to have a daily practice. This is called sadhana. So there's 3 words that go together. And sorry if this sounds technical, but they're actually beautiful words. Sadhana means a daily spiritual practice. And related to the same Sanskrit word as the word sadhu, that means the person who's doing the daily practice. So if you have a daily spiritual practice called sadhana, then you're called a sadhu. And the sadhus have a goal, and the goal comes from the same root. It means sadhya, or the word is sadhya, which means your goal. So you have those things in your life, then you have systematic practice. You'll be watering the seed, and you'll see that it's growing. So amend your soil every day. And we brought out about the Sadhana, Success Sadhana app. It's a way to track body, mind, spirit, and keep the basic soil of your life in good order. Yeah, this is something that came to me when I was listening to somebody a few years ago, and they talked about how justice delayed is justice denied. And it relates to one of the principles that the Golden Monk taught about with bad habits. He said a bad habit delayed is a bad habit denied. So in the practice of overcoming the weeds, pulling the weeds, one of the techniques is just to procrastinate, put it off, wait till later, and go on with your spiritual practice. Weed, when it's not given attention, will wither eventually. And so we recommend you major in applied procrastination. If you know how to procrastinate, then just apply it to your bad habits and say, yeah, I'll do them later. This really works, actually. So weed one patch at a time. Every part of your life affects every other part of your life. And if you don't know where to start, just start somewhere, even if it's a small bit, and you'll notice that you'll feel invigorated in other parts of your life, just making a little progress. So these were the basic takeaways or tips, actually, that we didn't mention within the third lesson, but one is trust good seeds. When you're looking for seeds, when you're planting it in the soil, know where they came from. So one of the things the Golden Monks talks about is association. We become whom we associate with. We take on the same desires and the same habits because we're highly open to suggestion. And then also just keeping in mind, it's a science. You reap what you sow, like gardening's a science. And also to be aware of your practice, be aware of what's going on inside, because the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow, which means it's like I got so busy over the last week, I didn't even walk in my greenhouse. And then when I finally went in there, I noticed that the battery was out in one of the watering systems. And that wasn't good. If I had gone away for another week, all the plants would have died. So you have to show up, actually be there and notice what's going on. And finally, connect to expert gardeners to help you with your garden. There's always better gardeners around who can take a look and see how you're doing and give you advice about how to make it better. Those are the first three lessons. Did you all remember? Starting to, right? Because we hear them every week, have heard them every week for the last 3 weeks. Let's just see, before I go into the lessons from the Golden Monk for today, which have to do, where does suffering come from and how to overcome it? Any of these teachings from the Golden Monk that stuck in your mind or you've been thinking about since you heard them? You can just reflect by, oh, the chat box have something in it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so there's a question on the chat box. S says, how does one explain the concept of soul and its indestructibility to children or people who do not believe this concept, the concept of transforming from one body to the other and rebirth?
Well, when you look at the sun, you don't need to do a lot of explaining. It's self-effulgent. So one of the ways that we experience consciousness is to look at it. That's what we did at the beginning. Of course, theoretically, you can talk about it, but if you notice your own consciousness, it's self-effulgent. Consciousness is light, actually. And so you don't need a lot of explanation for the sun, and you also don't need a lot of explanation, although it's interesting and can be helpful. But if you don't accept axiomatic truth coming from some higher authority, then through empiric means, you can also experience yourself by taking a look at it. Like, what is my consciousness? Can experience it. Sometimes people who don't have an orientation towards this kind of knowledge or understanding will have like an accident. And then they have this experience where they either realize they're really out of control, or they kind of step out of their body for a minute by force, and then they come back in and they just see it for themselves. Have you ever heard of that? And they see the world in a new light. I mean, it's who we are, actually. So sometimes if I hold a particular perspective and then something comes along to jar that perspective, that I'm kind of forced to look at it in a different way. So how to explain it? It's by, just as in the Bhagavad Gita, it's explained, consciousness illuminates the body, and you can experiment and notice how you can point your consciousness in different places. You can also notice that consciousness pervades the body. Like if I pinch my finger right here, I can feel it. How is that happening, by the way? There's Modern science has problems. Of course, as you're seeing, explaining the spiritual aspect of it too has various limitations at a certain point too. But modern science has problems when you look at the various aspects of the brain that apparently are stimulated when we're doing certain things. There's no binding property that has been discovered through science. What holds them all together and makes a unified experience, so they're all happening at once. So it's not that there's some empiric explanation that would verify that we're material beings. We just happen to be spontaneously exhibiting consciousness. Consciousness is something very different from the body. And as I said, we can see that for ourselves, even as we're transiting from sleep into awakening, if we're a little bit watchful when that's happening. Okay, let's take a couple more.
Wolf says that none of the NDE witness came back as atheist. NDE near-death experience witnesses.
Sure. Yeah. So that I don't know about none, but probably mostly what we hear about is people who have a slightly different perspective, and that then they look at it in a different way. Yes.
Charles says, thanks for the meditation. It did the work of medicine for me.
Oh, good.
And Raj says, thanks, Vaish, for adding ocean waves to the beach trip to make it more real this time. Nirali refers to video games to explain the concept of rebirth.
Concept of what?
For rebirth, I think she's
rebirth.
Video games could be one. Tony says,
I don't know how you all feel, but when I saw that slide with the person going on the stretcher, it talks about death. There's several impulses that come through my mental system. One is, ooh, that's scary. And the other one is, well, we're discussing right now what it is, and therefore there's a counterbalance. When I actually have a clear idea what's actually happening, it's not really scary.
Tony says, applied procrastination, good stuff. Subodha says, I like the linking of bad habits to spiritual starvation. Tony again reflected, I love these classes, thank you. Nicole says, bad habit delayed is bad habit denied.
Bad habit delayed is a bad habit denied, just as justice delayed is justice denied. Yeah. And we don't evade taxes, I hope, but we do avoid them. And that's what accountants do. And that what they do is they put them off as long as possible until you're in a different tax bracket. So it's same thing with habits. You can just put them off until they're irrelevant and get replaced somewhere else and procrastinate them. Okay, let's just show a few more slides to go into today's teachings, the new teachings from the Golden Monk. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, here we go. So then he met Rupa's brother, and he started his teachings. His brother's named Sanatan, and he asked the Golden Monk, why am I suffering? Is there a root cause of all suffering? And to give a little authenticity, here's his question, actually, which is exemplifies the way a person, even a very highly learned person, starts by asking a person who has wisdom. He said, Ke ami. Ke ami in Bengali means, who am I? Keni amai, jare tapatrai. So tapatrai means the three kinds of miserable conditions of life. We'll go into that in a second. And then he said, Iha nahi jani, she mani hitohoi. The total translation, who am I? Why do the threefold miseries always give me trouble? If I do not know this, how can I be benefited? So those were the three questions he asked the golden monk to start with. Okay, so then the golden monk described there's three categories of miseries. They're called, I have the Sanskrit names here spelled phonetically, but it's adhyatmic, adhibhotic, and adhidaivik. So the one on the far left is miseries caused by our own bodies and minds. Miseries caused by other living entities is the middle one. And miseries caused by higher forces of nature. So then I think, well, how many miseries are there? So let's look at for a little fun. I don't know how fun this is for you, but bodily miseries. Let's look at the alphabet of diseases and start with A. How many can you name diseases that start with A? You can put them in the chat. See if you get 5 really fast. Asthma, acidity, anxiety, arthritis, anemia, Alzheimer's, arteriosclerosis, alcoholism. Thank you, everybody. Fun, a fun game. I bet you could go on and on with the A's for a long time. And we haven't even gotten to the B's with botulism and C's and D's and E's all the way through. Sometimes people think when COVID's over, everything's going to be fine. The world will be pristine and everything like that. But actually, there are unlimited combinations and permutations of diseases waiting for us, just on the level of infection and so forth, and what to speak of parts defective on the body that cause bodily miseries. Okay, the next. Hope this is making you feel better. Miseries from other living entities. There's so many ways that we encounter other living beings. They have their own needs, interests, and concerns, and they conflict with ours one way or the other, and we get miseries from them. So that's the next category that the golden monk said of miseries. The next one, miseries from nature for 500. Suffering due to nature. Can anybody think of any ways in which we get some inconvenience or suffering from natural causes? You can put it in the chat. Earthquakes. Yeah, it's a good one for California. Wildfires, still good for California. Hurricanes. Global warming. My flight got canceled due to snowstorm. That qualifies. Floods, tornadoes, droughts. Evil people goes back to the second one. Chilly, cold winds, drought, earthquakes, hot summers. Yeah, it goes on, but due to nature. So he said there's these 3 categories of miseries. So he said that the first step in overcoming misery is to understand one's identity. So we have 2 identities. That's why we experience very naturally cognitive dissonance, because we're actually spiritual beings in a material body and mind, but we're spiritual beings. So there's a malaise. We're always feeling something's not quite right. So the more we come towards our spiritual identity, identifying ourselves as with our eternal nature, we're pure spiritual souls, we're full of knowledge, eternity, and bliss. And the more we witness the bodily conception, but don't participate in it consciously. In other words, we don't think, I am my body. We see on that side, the person's filled with, I am my temporary body, I am my ego, my thoughts, I'm my mind, I'm my feelings, me, myself, and I. So we do have an identity. It's not that we don't have an ego. Ego just means identity. There is an identity, the golden monk said, but it's spiritual and not material. But when we get mixed up in the material side and we identify with that which is material, that's when we suffer. We get dragged down by it. Then again, he described our source. And this time he said it's like fire. So although the original conscious source of everything, all material and spiritual energies, is in one place. It's the energies of that Supreme are spread everywhere. We're sitting on it right now. So then he said, did the Golden Monk, that illusion is the third potency, the third energy. So it's actually called something. It's in Sanskrit, it's spelled M-A-Y-A, and the two A's are long, so it's pronounced Maya. And literally in Sanskrit, Maya or illusion means that which is not. Remember that reflection that we saw in the reflecting pool? That was Maya. Because I say that's a tree. It's like, it looks like a tree, but it's not really a tree. It's temporary tree. So Wolf has a question. Let's see if we can answer Wolf's question. He said, is our soul here now in its entirety, or is it a spirit soul and the other part exists on the other side waiting for reunion, please? Well, that's an esoteric question. And actually, when the Golden Monk gets into the deeper teachings with Rupa, which I haven't gone into yet, I'm staying with the basic things so far. He talks about how when you water the creeper, it grows from this world into the spiritual world. He's giving a metaphor, but he said it's like you have dual citizenship. Even while you're in the same body, you have a connection to that higher reality. So he said, just like a creeper, it grabs on and it starts, it goes like I have jasmine in my yard, and it ends up in my neighbor's yard and growing there too. It crosses it goes underneath the fence, comes out with a runner, and then goes up there. So yes, we can be in both places at the same time, but basically, while we're in this body and we're aware of the body, we're confined only to the body. So spiritual practice helps us to break out of that conception. So when we forget our source, we suffer. He said that's the cause of our suffering, is forgetting our source and seeing things separate from the source. Then fear arises. So you see, just in a very simple terms, when we turn away from the light, then we see darkness in the simplest of terms, or we're not able to take advantage of the light and the heat as metaphor for using fire as the metaphor. So yoga means remembering the source. All the practices of bhakti yoga are to reconnect with the source. We're already connected, but means remembering that we're connected. And the moment that we remember that, then that's when the light comes in. And we notice that actually we're not these physical mental bodies. So in summary, to make it the section on suffering compact, the body that we have now, as soon as one gets a material body, it means there's going to be suffering, because there's 3 categories of suffering, and trying to mitigate suffering through material adjustment is impossible. Now, you want me to prove it really quick, because we only have 2 minutes? Let's say somebody's giving you a ride in a car, and you get in the car, but they have the heat on. So you take your jacket off. And then what do? They'll turn the heat down because they go, oh, you're warm. And they go, no, don't worry, I'll take my jacket. No, I'll turn down the heat. And then a few minutes later, because there's no heat and your jacket's off, you put your jacket back on. They go, here, I'll turn the heat back on again. This is indicative of all the ways in which I try to make arrangements in this world. And it never quite works out, because on the conception of I am this body we're not our bodies. We're just residents within the body. But, like if your car gets bumped and there's a little nick in it, it could give you mental anguish. Have you ever noticed that? Let's say you have a nice car and you're proud of it because oh yeah, my car's nice. And then it gets nicked. And then you could be walking around feeling, I feel terrible. Why? Because my car got nicked. So if I walk around thinking I'm this body, then every little thing that happens, and every little thing will happen, there's 3-fold miseries. We already named, we named about 1/billionth of the diseases we could name. anything could happen to it. If I identify with it, that's the problem. So bodily identification is difficult. Well, everybody, we got through a summary of the first 3 lessons of the Golden Monk, and we did 4 today. And I promised a quiz, but we ran out of time. So everyone's probably, that's why you're all smiling, right? No quiz today. So we'll come back to it another time. But thank you so much for staying in for all the teachings of the Golden Monk. And I want to say that if you take a little time every day to notice your own consciousness and practice some of the tenets of the 21-day fitness challenge, you'll notice you'll have something to measure by, that you'll have a daily practice that you can repair to, and that will help you to rise above the bodily conception of life. You may or may not know, but high in the Himalayas, yogis who meditate in caves, every once in a while come out to get fruits and roots to take back in to nourish themselves. And if by chance they see another yogi high on the peaks also doing the same thing, which is certainly a serendipitous occasion, they raise their hands high in the air and they say a phrase which means, keep the vibration going. So we're in little caves, so let's try it out. Haribo!
Haribo!
See you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love the
so much.
Bye.